Wind herded the smoke down Cedar Ridge's main street until it tasted like iron in the back of the throat. Lanterns guttered in broken windows. A piano key clanged somewhere inside the saloon each time the heat breathed. Sheriff Kane stepped into the orange wash of firelight and ash, boots crunching glass. The silver badge he wore knocked sideways by a smear of soot. His duster smelled of burned pine and old gunpowder. A scorched sign, livery, tilted on one hinge and tapped a slow, maddening rhythm against the post. Bodies lay where running had failed. A boy curled beneath his father as if the old man's spine could still be a wall. A card dealer sprawled with pasteboard stuck to his cheek like winter leaves. The Queen of Spades fused to his skin. Farther on, close to the water trough, a woman clawed at air that would not come. Her hair lit at the ends like a saint's halo. She coughed and saw Kane's boots. "Sheriff," she rasped, voice gravel and blood. "My Ruthie." She ran for the stable. Kane's steel-gray eyes tracked the alley in a single cut of attention. Off to his left, the gallows rose black against a red sky, rope swaying like a lazy serpent. He heard horses, too many, circling the town's edge, felt their hooves through his bones the way old soldiers feel thunder before it speaks. Across the street, the courthouse roof burned like a candle crown. Heat-bent nails screamed as rafters shifted, and embers snowed down over the steps where he had once made men stand and answer. The badge on his chest weighed more than the colt on his hip. He crouched at the woman's shoulder. Ash settled in her lashes. "Tell me where you saw her," he said. Even now his voice held the calm that had steadied drunks and gun hands and grieving mothers. She lifted a shaking arm toward the livery shadows, where smoke crawled low and angry. "Blue dress," she managed. "Braids." Kane rose, eyes cutting to the stable. A lick of fire rolled out from under the door like a cat's tongue. From deep inside came the choked scream of a horse, and a smaller sound, ragged, high. The sound his mind would not let him name. On the far end of town, gunshots cracked like snapped icicles. Men whooped. Another building took flame with a breathy whoomph. Shadows flickered against the distant ridge. Riders posted as a ring of teeth around a bleeding mouth. "Sheriff!" A man staggered out of the alley, one sleeve dark to the elbow, a butcher's apron stiff with someone else's sorrow. They're dragging folks from the back of the saloon. 10, 12 of them. Elias is with them. The man's lip trembled. "Ain't no law left, Kane." Kane didn't blink at the name. Elias Varick, the freed man, the man he had turned loose by noon, and who now walked the night like a torch-bearer. A breath hitched once in Kane's chest, small, private, and was gone. He tasted alkali dust, smoke, a thread of whiskey still lingering from the saloon's smashed bottles. He pulled his hat brim lower. "There's law," he said softly, almost to himself. "Question is, can it outrun the fire?" He crossed to the gallows and unhooked the bucket that always sat beneath. The rope brushed his shoulder. He did not look up at it. He ran for the livery, bucket slapping his thigh, badge bouncing like a small, cold heart. At the doors, heat pushed him back a step. His eyelashes crisped. He hit the hasp with the butt of his Colt. Once. Twice. Wood gave, flame sighed, and smoke rolled him in a blind embrace. He went low, duster dragging sparks, mouth wrapped in a bandana he tore loose with his teeth. "Ruthie!" he shouted, voice hammered flat by the roar. "Girl, answer me." Something moved left, a coughing knot of blue and braids, small hands groping for shape. He slid across the straw, fingers finding an arm hot with cinders. The child clutched a rag doll as if it could breathe for her. He scooped her, felt the tremor run through her ribs into his chest. Over his shoulder a gelding panicked against its stall, eyes like two black lanterns, hooves scrabbling. Kane's hand found the latch, released the animal, felt it blow past, and vanish into fire-lit night. He got the girl to the threshold and out, stumbling blind until cool air slapped his face. On the street, the mother saw blue cloth and made a sound that cracked the world open. Kane laid Ruthie in her arms. The woman's tears left clean tracks through soot. Her gratitude struck him like a thrown stone and fell away. Already he was moving. Already he was listening. Laughter rode the wind from the saloon, a string of men voices bright with liquor and cruelty. "Line 'em," one called. "Light it proper." Another voice wove through the others, confident as a drum beat. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Hold steady, boys. Sheriff'll come running like a dog to a dinner bell." Kane knew that voice the way a man knows an old scar. Elias Varick had spoken in the jail at noon with the same calm, talk of false warrants and a railroad man's revenge, of a deputy's whispers and a judge's dirty hands. Kane had judged the eyes, the tremor, or lack of it, in the mouth, the way the pulse in a neck ticked truth or lie. He had turned the key. He had said, "You step out clean and you stay that way. You don't, and I'll hunt you till your shadow forgets your shape." Now the shape of that shadow danced on the saloon wall. Kane picked up a fallen rifle from beside a dead drover, thumbed the sights without looking down. His silver badge caught the saloon's light and flashed. He took it off and let it spin in his fingers. 1, 2, 3 turns, then pinned it back, crooked. The metal burned against his shirt. "Law ain't always justice," he murmured, the words like gravel ground beneath a wagon wheel. "But justice rides with me." He moved down the street along the shaded side, where the heat wasn't a living thing. In the window glass he saw quick ribbons of his own motion, lean and black-hatted, a streak of night walking through fire. Behind him, someone called his name as a prayer, and someone else as a curse. He did not slow. As he reached the saloon, he saw them, townsfolk on their knees, wrists bound with hemp, a row of heads bowed like wheat before the scythe. 2 of Elias's men held torches. Another leveled a shotgun into the crowd, casual as a yawn. Elias stood on the boardwalk rail, boots leaving char on the polished beam, coat open, hair bright with sparks. He looked clean. He always had. The kind of outlaw who could sit in a judge's parlor and not stain the rug. He smiled when he saw Kane. "Evening, Sheriff." Kane raised the rifle a hair, his pupils pinched to gun-barrel moons. "Put the torches down." Elias cocked his head as if considering a fair price for a mule. "You put the town down first today, didn't you? Keys in a lock. Mercy is a fine sermon, but it makes poor armor." He nodded toward the prisoners. "Reckon you choose, Lawman. These 10, or that one?" He pointed with the torch at a figure slumped to the end of the line. Kane's breath hitched. The man wore a deputy's star, crooked, cheap tin, but the face behind the blood and soot belonged to a boy who had run Kane's errands since spring, and called him sir with a kind of reverence that hurt. Abel Finch, 20 maybe, eyes wide, a tremor in the jaw like a colt's first bit. Abel shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Don't bargain for me." The moral blade went in clean and twisting. Save 10. Lose Abel. Save Abel. Watch 10 burn. Somewhere down the street a church bell began to ring itself, ragged in the heat. Clong, clong. until the tongue cracked loose and fell. Kane spoke so quietly that only those closest heard. "Let them go, Elias. Take me instead." The gang rattled like a snake struck wrong. Someone laughed. Someone cursed. Elias didn't blink. "You ain't worth the town," he said, "but you are worth a sight of fear." He nodded to the torchman. "Start at the ends." Kane fired. The shot tore the torch from the man's hand and spun it skyward, a comet shedding sparks. He sprang up the steps as if the boards were stone. His Colt cleared leather with a whisper. Two more men folded, mouths making O's as if trying to sip the night. The shotgun boomed, buckshot chewing the corner post. Splinters kissed Kane's cheek. He felt the warm tick of blood. He dove, rolled behind a barrel, came up with a left-handed snapshot that clipped a gun from another wrist. Screams, smoke, the sweet rot smell of spilled beer, the sap smell of burning pine, the sting of hot rope. Hands still bound, the kneeling townsfolk flinched and pressed into each other. A baby wailed and then hiccuped into silence. Someone whispered, "Holy Mary," and someone else, "Hang him," and Kane could not tell which prayer ran to whom. He saw Abel twist his shoulders, trying to make himself a smaller target. In the haze, Elias moved as if the heat did not touch him, calm, balanced, hunting back. "Sheriff," Elias called conversationally, "you remember what you said in that fine, cool jail? You step out clean." He spread his hands. "I stepped. You opened the door, and I walked a whole town through it." The words found Kane and hung on him like chain. His jaw set. He glanced left. A water barrel, half full, something metal glinting on its rim, a jailhouse key, old style, tied to a length of twine, as if some half-drunk had played at justice, and dropped it there. The symbol struck him like a thrown rock, rust, brine, promise. He had one breath to choose. Put a bullet in Elias and likely set the torches to fall among the bound, or use that split second to slice the rope and arm the helpless, gambling that fear once broken becomes fury sharp enough to cut. He slid, snatched the key, flicked the knife from his boot, and surged into the line of kneelers. "Keep low," he said, cutting hemp, shoving wrists free, pressing iron into shaking hands. "When I stand, you run left for the courthouse steps. You—" He gave Abel the rifle, felt the boy's fingers jolt as if shocked. "Cover them." Abel's eyes shone wet and terrified, and grateful. "Yes, sir." Kane rose into the gunfire like a wall. The saloon's second-story balcony groaned. A burning beam dropped, roaring bright between him and Elias, throwing an ocean of sparks. Elias vanished behind the cascading fire, his laugh staying, circling, finding Kane's ear as if the flames were a speaking tube. "Tell 'em, Sheriff," the voice called from the smoke. "Tell 'em what you did this morning." Kane stepped through the falling embers, face set, Colt up, and froze. Not at the heat, but at the memory that struck him clean as a bell. The clink of shackles, a man's quiet eyes, a key turning. Hours earlier, in the cool dim of the jailhouse, the bench had creaked, and Elias Varick had said very softly, "Set me loose and you set this town free." The memory slammed open like a door. Morning light hit Cedar Ridge like a hammer wrapped in linen, soft at first, then insistent, beating dust into the day. In the jailhouse, the air smelled of coffee, gun oil, and old pine. Sunbeams knifed through the barred window and made slow-falling motes look like ash caught in prayer. Sheriff Kane sat with his chair tipped back, 2 legs, his black hat brim low, his silver badge spinning once, twice between thumb and forefinger, until it clicked flat against his chest. Elias Varick stood on the other side of the cell door, wrists bruised where the irons rubbed. He was lean, clean, and smiling with his mouth, but not his eyes. There was a calm to him, the kind gamblers carry after they've learned how every card bends. "I was framed, Sheriff," he said, voice even as a church floor, "by men who think the law is a ledger and people are entries to be erased." "Lot of innocent men in iron," Kane answered. His tone was gravel rolled under a boot, but his steel-gray eyes were awake and measuring. "Name 'em." "The railroad's agent, Birch. Judge Mallory, who signs his favors. Your deputies heard the whispers." Varick tipped his chin toward the front room where young Abel Finch scribbled at a ledger, thin shoulders squared like a boy trying to grow into a uniform. They needed a name to hang on a robbery that wasn't, a murder that never happened. My name buys time until theirs are safe. Kane let the chair thump forward. He rose, every line of his frame built by wind and hard miles. The faint scar along his jaw caught the light like a pale stitch. "You talk smooth for a man wants mercy." "Not mercy, judgment." Varick stepped closer to the bars. He had a way of filling the silence. "Let me walk before noon, and I'll put a noose on the right neck. Mallory first, Birch second. I know where the books are buried." The words hung like a snake from a rafter, promising rescue or fangs. A fist pounded the front door. The whole jail seemed to flinch. Abel jumped, ink blurring across the page. Kane didn't. He walked out, pulled the door open, and cool daylight poured over his boots. 3 merchants crouched around their courage, hats in hand, faces pinched. "Sheriff," the fattest of them said, "we hear tell you aim to send that cut purse to the judge for circuit trial." He pointed past Kane's shoulder as if the outlaw were a stain that could be wiped if a finger pressed hard enough. "This town needs an example." Kane's eyes did a slow, quiet cutting. "This town needs a morning where a boy isn't told to watch a man die to feel safe. We pay levies. You give us law." The man pressed, "Law that looks like hanging." Kane let that sit a heartbeat. The image in his mind was a rope swaying black against a bright sky. "Law looks like process," he said, and closed the door on their mouths. Back in the cell room, the ticking wall clock sounded louder for a moment, like time itself had come down to listen. Varick watched Kane with the patience of a cat on a sill. "They'll make an example of me, Sheriff, out there." He nodded toward the gallows at the far end of the street, visible through the window like a promise, "and they'll call it order. You know the difference between that and justice." Kane did. He felt it like an old wound under rain. He walked to the keys, heavy as anchors on their hook. His hand hovered, then dropped. "Sheriff?" Abel stepped into the doorway, cap crushed in his hands. A small nick curled white on his knuckle, a barber's razor cut from a week back. Kane remembered because he remembered everything that bled. Judge Mallory sent a wire. "Wants Varick held without transfer. Says federal men are looking." Kane took the telegram. The wording was too neat, the timing too quick, the signature too confident. He felt the shape of a lie in the ink. "You believe it?" Abel's eyes shifted to the iron door, then back. He'd run Kane's errands and called him sir with a reverence that made the sheriff's chest ache in private. I don't know what to believe," the boy confessed, "but folks out there are saying we ain't safe while he breathes." Varick grinned, small and bright. "Safety. That the sermon, Sheriff?" He tapped the bars with one knuckle. A town kept safe by hanging the wrong man. Men like you ain't wrong by accident, Kane said. But the map inside him was already redrawing. He had seen the railroad's men lean on judges. He had watched money make law walk backward. "Let me make it right," Varick said. "Let me walk, and I'll lead you clean to the rot. I swear it on my mother's grave." "You got a mother buried?" Kane asked. Varick's mouth twitched. "Somewhere." A shadow crossed the window. Kane moved to it and looked past his own reflection into the square. The noon stage had come early. A tall man in a cream suit stood by the hitching rail, hands gloved in kid leather despite the heat, not a dust streak on him. The man tipped his hat to no one, then turned and walked toward the courthouse, where a clerk waited with a ledger as if he had known they would arrive together. Birch. Railroad. Kane felt his jaw set. He turned back to the cell. In the corner, a small dark stain had dried beside Varick's cot. Blood smudged by boot heel. Someone had visited late. Someone Kane hadn't logged. He filed the angle of that smear in his mind. The clock ticked on. Dust twitched in the streak of light like nervous confession. "Abel," Kane said, "fetch the circuit statute from my desk, the one on detention beyond a day." The boy hurried, relief flickering that there was paper to trust. Kane faced Varick again. "If I find one crooked line in what you told me, one, you go back in a box and I nail the lid shut." Varick nodded, solemn as a preacher, but triumph glimmered behind his eyes like a wet blade hidden in straw. "Fair's fair." Kane unhooked the keys. They clanked against each other, a chain of small bells. He slid one into the lock. Metal met metal with a tired sigh. The door groaned. For a heartbeat, nothing in the world moved but his hands. He heard his wife's laugh the way he remembered it in winter, his boy's bare feet drumming the porch, the shot that took both, and the silence after. "Law ain't always justice," he breathed, the words hoarse under his breath. Not for Varick, and not for Abel, and not for the town, maybe not even for himself. He turned the key. The bolt slid back with a sound like a verdict. The hinge squealed. Varick stepped out of the shadow and into the beam of sun, slow, savoring. Up close, he smelled faintly of lye and peppermint, the scent of a man who planned how he would be perceived. He lifted his freed wrists as if he couldn't quite believe hands could be empty. "Much obliged, Sheriff," he said softly. "You won't regret this." "Most regrets show up late," Kane said. He took a step closer, close enough to count the pulse at Varick's throat. "You step outy clean, and you stay that way. You don't." His eyes cut briefly to Abel, who stood in the doorway clutching a thin law book like a shield. "And I'll hunt you till your shadow forgets your shape." Varick's smile widened by a single tooth. "I've been hard to catch my whole life." They walked together into the front room. Kane took the book from Abel and set it gently on the desk. Through the open door, the street was a long dirt tongue, tasting heat. The gallows loomed at the end like a punctuation mark to the town's grammar. A dust devil spun idly by the livery, braided the street's trash, and fell apart. Birch in the cream suit watched from under the courthouse awning, a silver-topped cane at his fingers. He lifted it in the smallest salute. His eyes were pale and far away, like a ledger's rose pretending to be sky. It put a taste in Kane's mouth like old pennies. "Sheriff," Abel whispered. "You sure?" "No," Kane said. He pushed the door wide. "But I'm certain." He took the irons off Varick's wrists. The man rubbed the raw bracelet marks, eyes half closed, as if freedom was a warm basin. He looked at Abel like a man appraising a yearling, and reached out as if to clap the boy's shoulder. "Careful now," Kane said, and Varick's hand paused, hovering, then dropped with a friendly little laugh that made the hair lift at the back of the sheriff's neck. On the threshold, Varick turned once more. "You and me," he said almost admiringly. "We could have ridden together, another life." "This one'll do," Kane answered. Varick stepped into the hard noon. His boots printed the dust, neat and deliberate. Far down the street, a church bell clanged a single time, as if the rope had been tugged by accident or omen. Varick didn't look back. He moved like a man toward a stage where a part was waiting. Kane watched him go until the bright made his eyes water. He wiped nothing away. Abel shifted beside him. He headed for the hotel, the boy said, as if naming the direction might give it sense. "Write down the time," Kane said, "and every face he passes. Start learning the habit. Memory is half a badge." Abel's pencil scratched. Outside, a freckled stable hand stood on a crate to patch a banner that had come loose. Kane noticed the boy's boots, brand new, too fine for a stable. The banner itself was odd, too. Bold letters, tidy paint, no smears. Mallory and Birch Development. Courthouse renovations begin tonight. Tonight. Kane's stare went flat. Renovations meant wagons. Wagons meant lamp oil. Lamp oil meant a smell that would hide the stink of something else burning. He breathed in. The town smelled different now, under the coffee and the dust and the noon horse. It smelled like plans. Abel looked up from his ledger, hopeful and young, and wanting the world to be what it said it was. "We did right, didn't we, Sheriff?" Kane answered without looking away from the banner. "Ask me at sundown." Outside, Varick passed beneath the awning of the hotel. In the shade, a man in a dark coat tipped his hat to him with 2 fingers. Kane saw only the slightest exchange, glove to glove, and the quick spider flash of metal from palm to sleeve. Not a coin, a matchbook. Kane's hand fell to the pearl handle of his Colt as the church bell clanged again, and from beyond the ridge, a faint echo answered. A drift of hoofbeats where there should have been none in the heat of noon. He stepped off the threshold into the sunlight, eyes narrowing. The silver badge on his chest caught the glare, flashed once like a warning, and from the hotel balcony above, a single ash flake landed on the brim of his hat, gray, soft, and smelling like old paper that had just remembered fire. By afternoon, the heat sat on Dry Creek, like a mean drunk, heavy, and looking for a reason. Sheriff Kane walked the length of Main Street with dust prickling the back of his throat, his silver badge warm where it rested against his chest. Folks watched him from behind window lace and slatted shutters, eyes that cut away too fast, hands that paused mid-sweep, mid-sail, mid-prayer. The town had a new habit. Silence that ended half a heartbeat too late. Jonah Vale, gaunt, unshaven, the criminal Kane had unlocked at noon, sat on the water trough's edge by the livery with a tin cup in both hands and a rope-burn bracelet blooming purple around his wrist. The iron from his shackles still lay on the jailhouse desk, cold and accusing. Deputy Rafe Mallory trailed a step behind Kane, jaw clenched, hat low, the stiffness in his shoulders broadcasting judgment. "You made a mistake, Sheriff," Mallory muttered, voice pitched so only the wind and Kane could hear. "Man like that runs when sundown hits, and if he don't, his friends will come take him. We should put him back in irons." Kane didn't slow. Law says a man goes free when the evidence won't stand. He rolled the badge with his thumb, made it spin against the leather strap of his duster. One slow turn of hammered silver. Out on the ridge a hawk hung on invisible wire, waiting. Justice says we keep our eyes open. Mallory's laugh was a dry rasp. Justice won't stitch bodies together after dark. Little signs first, like coyotes testing a fence. The telegraph wire began to sing, a thin metallic keening that set teeth on edge, then went quiet at once. In the depot office, the key clicked twice and died, the operator raising both palms at Kane. "Cut south of the arroyo," he said, clean as a barber's touch. At Grady's Mercantile, salt sacks had been hauled off the top shelf, the twine ends laid on the counter in neat loops. 2 cases of kerosene missing, Grady whispered, eyes on the floorboards. "I didn't sell 'em, Sheriff." Outside, a wet, sharp smell of creosote rode the heat. Someone was laying fire in their thoughts. The blacksmith's dog, an old brindle half-blind to everything but trouble, barked at nothing and then whimpered back under the stoop. Horses stood hip-shot and head-tossing at the hitch rails, whites of their eyes shining like slivers of moon. Kane angled toward the gallows at the far end of the square, the town's blunt reminder of what came of bad choices. The fresh rope hung there oiled and too neat, a noose coiled like a sleeping snake. He touched the beam. Tack oil stained his fingers. Someone had seen to it in the last hour. "You smell that?" he asked. Mallory sniffed, scowled. "Tar. Maybe the Cooper's working his pitch." "Cooper closed 2 days," Kane said. The wind shifted. Beneath tar and creosote lay another scent, the ghost of sulfur, as if a match had just died. Children's laughter floated thin and wavering from the schoolyard, a brittle sound in the heat. A shot cracked from the alley behind the assay office. Kane moved before the echo finished, boots hammering plank to dirt, dirt to plank. He cut through the alley stink of cabbage and horse piss as a second round splintered brick near the schoolhouse corner, showering grit. "Down!" he barked, one hand up to the teacher, one to the cluster of frozen, wide-eyed kids. He saw the boy last, the one with hair like dry straw and a scar notched in his eyebrow, standing dumb as a fence post, watching the dust where the bullet chewed. Kane grabbed the boy's collar, hauled him under the schoolhouse eave, as a third shot ripped the bell rope so it swung free, clapping the bell once in a dull, wrong note. By the time Kane rounded the clapboard corner, the shooter was already gone, boot prints in the alley sand, a heel shaved flat to throw the prints backward, the old Messila trick. What the shooter left behind was stranger, a paper cartridge wrapper pinned to a barrel with a sliver of bone, sealed in black wax bearing a crooked cross. Kane pried it free, felt the wax crumble under his thumb. The mark was familiar and ugly, a gang sign from the border country, the kind men in red sashes tied at their throats like trophies. He had seen it once on a church door after a hamlet was scoured to the rafters. Mallory arrived breathing hard, eyes darting. "You get him?" "No," Kane said, but he left his calling card. He held up the wax. "Devil's crossers." Mallory swore. "They ride 50 at a clip, and you let their man walk out of our jail." Kane said nothing. He was staring past Mallory's shoulder at something else. 2 lantern flashes on the south ridge, long and long, then darkness, then one quick blink. A code. The answer came from town, high and hidden. He turned, slow as a weather vane, until his eyes settled on the church steeple. The church door was propped with a brick. Inside, the pews smelled of dust and hymn books. A lace of ash lay along the aisle as if someone had shaken out a lamp. Preacher Caldwell stood near the altar with his collar unbuttoned and sweat bright in the tufts along his jaw. "Evening, Sheriff," he said too quickly. "Storm coming. Air feels mean." "You seen anyone up in your tower, Reverend?" Caldwell's eyes flickered just once toward the back, the way a man looks at a rattler he hopes holds still. "Just the bell rope broke, that's all." Kane climbed the narrow stairs. The tower was hotter than a forge. Tar smell thickened until it felt like a weight on the tongue. He found the rope frayed and wet with something that wasn't rain. Beside the hatch, set on the sill with the care of a communion cup, sat a lantern with a wick clipped short. Signal work. And there in the angle of shadow, hat low, coat off, shirt dark at the armpits, stood Deputy Mallory, one hand on the bell yoke. "I thought I told you to check the east side," Kane said. His voice was gentle, which was dangerous. Mallory straightened. "I heard the clap. Came to look. You sent two long, one short." Mallory's mouth opened, closed. "I don't know a damned code." Kane stepped closer. The tower plank creaked like an old knee. Through the louvers he could see the ridge again. 3 faint pips answered, short, long, long. The skin between Kane's shoulder blades went cold. "Reverend," Kane called down the stairs. "Who else has a key to this door?" "No one but me and—" Caldwell hesitated. "And Deputy Mallory when he sleeps patrol on the church bench." Mallory's hand drifted toward his belt, then away, then halfway again. He didn't finish the motion. Kane watched the tremor in his fingers the way a coyote watches brush for quail. He didn't draw. Not yet. "Law ain't always justice," Kane murmured, the words like iron filing off a blade. He reached past Mallory, pinched the lantern wick with 2 fingers, left a smear of tar on himself. "But tonight I aim to make 'em meet." By twilight, shutters were nailed flat and lamps hooded. The liveryman led his best team into the alley and shut them out of sight. The widows gathered in the boarding house parlor with quilts in their laps and rifles across their thighs, lips moving on psalms. Somewhere, a harmonium bled a thin, brave hymn. Kane stood in the jailhouse doorway and made a decision that would not unmake. Jonah Vale looked up when the key rasped. Fear and defiance both lived behind his eyes. "You still think I'm the devil they want?" Jonah said. His voice scratched the air. "Because I ain't. But devils are coming. They're already here." Kane slid the Colt across the desk. "I locked you this morning for the law. I'm unlocking you now for justice. You put that muzzle anywhere near a child or a woman, I will end you before the hammer falls. Do we understand each other?" Jonah's hands hovered over the pistol like a man warming his fingers at a strange fire. He nodded once. "Much obliged." Mallory watched from the corner, fists on his hips. "You're deputizing an outlaw?" "I'm deputizing a man who can shoot straight," Kane said. He tossed Jonah a star from the bottom drawer, a dull, spare badge with a bent prong. "Wear it or don't. It won't stop a bullet. It might stop a fool." Night came fast, the way it does when the sky decides to skip mercy. Wind rose and ran its fingers under doors. The school bell with its severed rope swung in a breath of its own and chimed once, just once. A hollow bone-deep sound. From the ridge south, 20 pinpricks of flame sparked and then were cupped out, one after another, like eyes winking shut. Grady ran up out of breath, hat in both hands. "Sheriff, there's a wagon by the water tower, barrels in it. I smelt kerosene clear through my teeth." Kane's jaw ticked. "Get me a man for each corner of the square. No shouting. No heroics. Put buckets at every porch. And put your boy under a table, Grady, not behind a window, under. What about you? Grady asked, voice small. Kane looked at his town, the jailhouse, the gallows beam blackening with night, the steeple with its mute bell and tar-thick air, faces he knew by the set of around-the-eye wrinkles and the way their hands found prayer without thinking. He set his hat, spun the badge once, and felt it click true against his ribs. "I'm going to the tower," he said, "and if I find another lantern blinking to the hills, I'll know where the slaughter starts." Then the harmonium stuttered to silence. Far out past the last fence line, a long, low whistle rose, like a train's, though no train ran through Dry Creek. The wind carried it across the roofs and into Kane's bones. "Sheriff," Jonah breathed beside him, Colt already low and ready. "You hear that?" Kane did, and over the whistle came a new sound, soft at first, then building, the clatter of many horses moving at once, the earth beginning to tremble, lanterns lifting and dipping on the ridge like a procession of fallen stars. The church bell swung again without a rope, and tolled once, twice, thrice. Kane looked up at the steeple, and saw a hand he recognized slide back from the louvers, leaving a smear of tar on white paint. Dusk slid over dry water like a knife through canvas, slow, tearing, inevitable. Heat died, and left the smell of creosote and old sweat. Sheriff Kane stood under the awning of the jailhouse, shadow swallowing the bottom half of his face, his silver badge catching the last light as it spun lazily in his fingers. Across the street, the gallows stood like a black tooth against the purple sky. The town held its breath. Inside the cell, Gideon Creed, shackles off since noon, soul still shackled to a dozen sins, sat on a bench with his hat in both hands, elbows on his knees, eyes hard as horn. The door was open. Kane had opened it himself. Not an hour after, blood had started to trickle over the day like spilled ink. A ranch house on the outskirts shot to splinters, a freight team burned where it broke, a child's ribbon snagged on barbed wire, crimson dark. Kane could feel the town watching him through lace curtains and finger-width shutters. "You freed a criminal," their silence said. "Now look what follows him." Bootsteps scuffed behind. Deputy Boyd swallowed the dust in his throat and tried to keep his voice steady. "You reckon they'll come up the East Road, Sheriff?" Kane flicked a glance. Boyd's hat sat too low, too nervous. "No, they think I think that. They'll come through the wash." He nodded toward the black gully that cut behind the livery and spilled into Maine like a dry vein. As if conjured, a wind curled up that wash, bringing sound with it, the soft scrape of iron on stone, the clink of curb chains, the patient breathing of horses whose riders knew how to make noise disappear. Lamps along Maine wavered. Far out, a coyote flung up a thin, hungry cry and shut up quick. "Inside," Kane said to the handful of shopkeepers and boys playing stout behind the water troughs. "Barn doors, barrels. Keep your heads down. If you can't shoot, pray. If you can shoot, don't waste it." "Sheriff," Mrs. Finnegan whispered from the mercantile doorway, flour on her hands like pale gloves. "My Thomas is at the smithy yet." "I see him." Kane's voice stayed calm. "Thomas bank corner. Keep the bellows light if you want the forge to live to morning." Thomas bobbed his head, eyes wide. The town slid where it needed to be. That was the trick. Move fear like furniture until it made a defensible room. Behind him, Gideon stood and came to the threshold, one step from the street. He wore that same quiet gallows grin men get when they've looked over the rail and saw the ground rising. "You going to cuff me again, Sheriff, or hand me a gun?" Kane's fingers, pausing on the badge, told more truth than words. He saw the night before him like a ledger. Left column, law. Right column, living souls. He holstered the badge with a sigh he didn't let loose. "You fire a round outside my say, and I break your hand for it." Gideon's smile thinned. Fair enough. He took the Winchester from the rack with a reverent slowness, like a sinner accepting communion. The wood had the polish only years and sweat could give. He checked the loading gate, thumbed back the hammer, and said low, "That dust ain't random. See how it's low and tight? They're running with wet cloth on the horses' muzzles. Keeps them quiet." "You rode with them once," Kane said. "I rode near a lot of devils," Gideon answered. "These boys move like men who drilled under a flag. Watch for a signal, bugle or lamp." He tilted his head. "Hear it? Not spurs. Spurs got jingle. That's carbine swivels, soldier steel." A bell clanked somewhere, and then fell silent, as if a hand had caught the clapper mid-swing. Kane's eyes lifted to the church belfry. A single lamp winked there, 2 short, 1 long. It repeated, not a prayer, a code. "Who told them our streets?" Kane murmured. Gideon didn't answer. He didn't need to. Kane felt the answer like a splinter under the nail. Down the wash, phosphor sparks peeped like kitten eyes, then grew into lanterns, cinched low to stirrup straps. The riders funneled out, dark shapes against darker scrub, a dozen, then more. They fanned into Maine as neatly as a drill team changing ranks. The sound of their horses' hooves turned the dust to a whispering sea. Kane stepped down into the street and met them in the open. He didn't draw. He just put one boot out, then the other, until his shadow and theirs were touching. "Evening," he said, voice level as a spirit level on a coffin lid. "Town's closed." The lead rider wore a preacher's collar hanging loose from a black string. His hat brim came down like a guillotine over a square jaw. He eased his horse to the hitch rail and smiled with too many teeth. "We ain't here for the town, Sheriff. We're here for a man." "Then you're here for me," Kane said. "Don't flatter yourself. We're here for Gideon Creed." Kane didn't turn his head. He didn't blink. He kept his voice calm and let the words find their own gravity. "His jail cell's open. That means he's under my word. You take him off my street, you take me with." The preacher-looking rider leaned and spat neat. "You freed a murderer at noon and folks died by sundown. That's a bad word to hang your hat on." He straightened, the leather of his coat creaking like a saddle at a funeral. "My name's Mason Crow. I speak for men with memory. Gideon killed our kin. He goes in the dirt tonight. Step aside." In the hardware doorway, someone hissed, "Crow of the Quail River lot." "Shut your mouth," Kane said without looking, and the mouth shut. Crow lifted a hand. Behind him, riders turned their mounts sideways, forming a chest-high barricade of horseflesh and rawhide, gun muzzles peeking through like snakes in brush. A wind unfurled a sheet of dust between the two sides. Lantern light turned it into a veil. Kane spoke through it. "You boys ride hard to wear borrowed uniforms." He nodded at the polished carbine rings, the matched war saddle rigs you don't find on drifters. "Ex-cavalry, or just good thieves?" Crow's smile didn't move. But a man 3 horses back flinched at the word, borrowed. Kane filed the face, narrow, with a tooth chipped on the left. He'd seen that tooth in the jail last spring when they were booking deserters for the railroad. "Gideon, at Kane's shoulder, let out a breath that was almost a laugh. They ain't crows. He's fronting for somebody safer and richer. You smell that? Kane did. A clean scent under the horse and sweat. Whale oil and fine soap. Banker smells. Judge smells. A second lamp winked up in the belfry. 2 long, 1 short. The code changed. Crow's eyes flicked up, and just for a blink, softened like a man catching sight of coin. Inside the church, a shadow moved behind the slats. Tall, with a tilt of the hat, Kane knew the way a man knows his own handwriting. Boyd. The tilt was Boyd's. Kane's jaw tightened until it ached. Every word the deputy had said that day lined up in his head and marched past. East Road. Nervous hat. A question asked too loud. Betrayal tasted like copper. You want my man, Kane said softly. Come earn him. He stepped back 2 paces, enough to clear a field of fire without showing fear. His badge ticked a slow circle between thumb and forefinger, the way it did when he was deciding what kind of man he would be tonight. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. Crow's hand lifted. Take him. Gunfire cracked, angry hornets in a bottle. The first volley hit the water trough, sending a sheet of cold that slapped Kane's cheek and brought the stink of old metal. Bullets chewed the jailhouse post and hammered the mercantile sign until a Fien danced in the lamplight, like a prayer with letters missing. The town answered. Thomas's smithy roared. He'd fed the fire and thrown scrap in, a blast of white that blinded the first rank of riders. Mrs. Finnegan stepped out behind her barrel and sent a tidy 32 into a saddle horn. The horse jinked, and the rider toppled, boot catching, body dragged in a cruel dance over the packed ground. Kane moved in the gaps, like water finds the low place, his colt bucking, muzzle flash stroking his face with hot hands. Gideon worked the Winchester like a man playing a hymn he knew too well, the lever clacking, brass shells peeling on the boards. Bugle, Gideon barked. It came, a thin brass squeal from the alley behind the church. The riders regrouped on it like hounds to a call, not Crow's signal, someone else's. The belfry lamp snapped out, then reappeared in the judge's window above the crooked courthouse shell, where lightning once split the roof beam, and no one ever repaired it. Because justice here had been limping for years. During a lull that hurt the ears, a voice rolled from that ruined courthouse, velvet laid over iron. Sheriff Kane, this is Territorial Marshal Royce Bell. Stand down. Creed is a federal fugitive. You will not obstruct. Kane felt it in his bones like a winter storm. Not Crow, then. Crow was hired teeth. The hand on the leash wore a badge and a perfect shave. Marshal, Kane called back, taste of grit on his tongue. You ride with outlaws now. What I ride with is the law, Bell replied, and the law says Gideon Creed hangs for what he did on Quail River. A slow, pained sound worked from Gideon's chest. I didn't put those folks in the ground, Kane. I robbed men who deserved robbing, but that's slaughter. He shook his head. Crow's mark looks like me when you look at it by lamplight. That's the trick. Bell knows it. Bell paid for it. Neat talk for a man folks want dead. Marshal Bell drawled. Last chance, Sheriff. Kane took in the street, horses steaming, bodies in the dust, lantern light trembling on barrels, the gallows 3 doors down, wearing the night like a shawl. Boyd's silhouette slid from the belfry stairs to the courthouse shadow, moving with a cat's patience. He carried something long wrapped in burlap. A fuse rope trailed like a snake behind him, hissing a whisper of fire. Dynamite. Kane looked up once, quick, to the night. Stars pricked through, cold and bright, witnesses that never spoke. His badge spun once more. Stopped. He holstered the Colt and raised his voice so the whole street owned it. "Bell, you set a charge in my town, and you don't take a step back into daylight again." "Then come stop me," Bell said. The velvet gone now. Iron only. A hiss grew sharp. The fuse brightened, snaking toward the livery wall where kegs were stacked for the trail drives, gunpowder enough to write Dry Water's name in the sky. Kane lunged forward and froze. Gideon's barrel came up, the bead steady at Kane's spine. "Don't move," Gideon said, voice a rasp, eyes on something behind Kane, not Kane. "He ain't aiming for the livery first." Kane turned just enough to see what Gideon saw. Boyd had pivoted. The wrapped bundle wasn't pointed at powder. It was pointed at the base of the gallows, where the supports met the old courthouse wall. One blast would drop both, bury the street with splinters and stone, and anyone fighting under it. "Sheriff," Boyd called from the dark in a voice gone strange, like a man trying on someone else's words. "I'm sorry." He struck the second match. The fuse split in two, and both ends sizzled toward doom. The two fuses hissed like snakes, arguing in dry grass, one running toward the courthouse footings and gallows posts, the other licking along the livery wall toward kegs marked FFG. Sheriff Kane sighted on the brighter hiss and fired. The bullet clipped the fuse. Sparks spat sideways and died, leaving a scorched curl of hemp smoking on the boards. "Other one," he barked. Abel Finch was already moving. The kid slid on his knees through tar grit and ash, slammed his palm into the running ember, then flattened it with the heel of his hat. The stink of burned felt bit the air. He hissed through his teeth, eyes streaming. "Got it." A rifle cracked from the dark by the courthouse. The shot tore the brim from Abel's head and lifted a curl of his hair. The boy recoiled against the gallows leg, breath chewing at his throat. Kane dragged him behind the base beam, the wood hot enough to burn a brand through cloth. "Stay down," Kane said, and the boy swallowed hard and nodded, knuckles white around the rifle Kane had shoved at him hours ago. The street roared back to life. Muzzle flashes stuttering up and down the line like lightning along a dry horizon. The riders regrouped around their leader in the open, Mason Crow, horses snorting vapor into the sudden cool. On the courthouse balcony above, a figure stepped into the lamplight, and quiet fell in a way that felt unnatural, pulled by a gravity of attention. He wore a clean waistcoat and a gambler's smile, hat tilted with a showman's nerve. His wrists were bare of irons now, but purple bruises circled them like bracelets. The silver of a stolen watch chain gleamed at his vest. He rested one hand on the balcony rail and tapped a matchbook against his knuckles, soft, steady, like a clock. Elias Varick. Kane felt the world tilt. The exact pitch his gut had known at noon and refused. The tilt of a man stepping onto a bad plank he himself had laid. Wind lifted the corner of the Renovations Tonight banner below Varick's boots. The cloth snapped once, and in the sound, Kane heard the morning's choice turning into night's verdict. "Evenin', Sheriff," Varick called, voice carrying the kind of gentleness that turns a crowd to listen. "You keep a clean town. Shame how fast it dirties when a door opens." Crow's head turned, surprise creasing his brow. "This ain't your stage, Varick," he growled. "We ride on my say." Varick didn't look at him. "You ride when money lifts the rein," he said mildly. He flicked the matchbook open with his thumb and showed the inside like a card trick. A railroad seal burned into pasteboard, Birch's crest. Some men pay with ledgers, some with blood. I get paid twice. Something moved in the courthouse shadows. A man with an immaculate hat and a voice like polished iron stepped forward beside Varick, Territorial Marshal Royce Bell. He didn't glance at the outlaw. He addressed Kane as if Varick were a desk ornament. "Stand your men down. The federal warrant on Creed." "That name," Varick said with a small laugh, finally cutting his eyes toward Bell, "was for the rehearsals." He leaned into the light, and for an instant the charming line of his mouth cut away, showing the thing underneath. Cold arithmetic, appetite without heat. "You wanted a story, Sheriff. I let you read the wrong chapter." Abel, breath tight, whispered, He said his mother's grave." "Somewhere," Kane answered, voice beaten flat. He stepped into the street, ash drifting in his hair. "Tell him then. Tell him what you are." "Gladly." Varick's smile returned, brighter for having been stripped. "I'm the hand that knocks and the hand that opens. I cut the wire at dawn and left a telegram on your desk before noon, Sheriff. Judge Mallory's upright cursive in my best imitation. I bought kerosene with church money that Crow's boys lifted last week." He nodded toward the steeple. Deputy Mallory, Boyd, whatever he's calling himself when he kneels, blinked the lights like a loyal acolyte. "That banner?" He kicked the renovation sign with his heel, painted by a drunk who didn't ask who supplied the letters. I whispered to a preacher about fear. I promised a lawman a promotion. Bell's jaw tightened, but he didn't step back. "Mind your words." "Marshal," Varick said with amused courtesy, "I mind everything. That's why I'm still breathing." He held the matchbook up, caught the lamplight on the gilt edge. "You wanted this place cleaned for the rails. I offered to sweep. I told you a slaughter would hang on Gideon Creed's neck and bend a town into buying cheap. You signed without seeing the ink. Don't fret. I'll name a street for you." The riders shifted, unease running horse to rider to bit. Crow's face went ugly. "You're saying you hired us to stain your own floor, that you paid for the same blood you're selling?" "First rule of commerce," Varick said softly. "A good story raises the price." He flicked the match once. Sulfur bloomed. "And a bad man makes a fine villain if you want folks to forget who carried the ledger." Kane heard the hiss of scar tissue forming on the town's faith. He heard his own promise returning like an echo he could not outrun. "You step out clean, and you stay that way." "You used my badge to open the gate," he said, voice low, deadly calm. "You walked a storm through." Varick tilted his head, almost tender. "You offered me mercy. I brought you truth." He spread his hands. "Law ain't always justice, remember? But justice rides with me too, just a different saddle." A woman's sob knifed the air, the mother from the livery clutching Ruthie. She stared up at the balcony, as if a string tied her gaze to the man there. "Please," she said hoarsely. "Please, sir, we got nothing. Don't." Varick's eyes passed over her the way a banker's pass over a small debt. "Mercy's for mornings," he said. "Night is for settling." Crow swung his carbine toward the balcony rail, finger tightening. "You ain't settling me." Varick didn't flinch. He didn't have to. Two of his own men who had worn Crow's red neckerchiefs an hour ago, eased their rifles sideways and took Crow in the ribs at the same breath. He folded, gasping once like a landed fish, then slid boneless from the saddle. His horse shied. The line broke. The rider's formation stuttered like a sentence dropped mid-word. Bell cursed under his breath. "Damn you." Varric's smile thinned. Choose better partners. Kane felt the moment balance on a razor's edge. The town leaned forward without meaning to, as if the street itself were a bowl being tipped. He took one step, then one more, until he stood almost below the balcony, close enough to catch the faint smell off Varric, lye, and peppermint. Yes, but beneath it, smoke from rooms on fire in other counties. You wanted me to be the hinge, Kane said, to make this look like Mercy's crime. I wanted you to be you, Varric answered, and his eyes at last held something like respect. Cold, clinical, the kind a hunter has for a wolf he's tracked a long while. You are clean, Sheriff. Men like you open doors because you can't stand a locked one. I don't despise that. I invest in it. Kane's badge spun once, bright in the heat, then stilled under his thumb. You ever carry a badge? He asked. For a day, Varric said lightly. It bit. Abel rose into a crouch beside Kane, voice unsteady, but loud enough to carry. Mr. Varric, he called, because he could not stop believing men might be called back by their names. You can still... Boy, Varric said, and for the first time his voice went hard. No honey left. Grow up. A lamp fell at the edge of the boardwalk and smashed. Fire licked along the spilled oil like a fox darting under a henhouse. Screams feathered up the block. Kane didn't look away from Varric. It ends here, he said. Just you and me. Varric's laugh was small, almost pitying. No, Sheriff. It never ends with two men in a street. It ends when everyone watching decides what they believe about you. He lifted a hand. Two of his shooters dragged a figure into the lamplight and shoved him to his knees, a man with tar on his cuffs and a half-burned rope in his fist. Deputy Boyd Mallory. His eyes found Kane's and slid away in shame. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice scraped raw. They said, Marshall said if I blinked the lamps there'd be no blood. Said it was federal. Varric's smile showed teeth again. Federal, he repeated, tasting the word. Such a polite way to say forever. Kane's jaw worked once. The decision that rose had no soft edges. Untie him, he said to Varric's men. Colt steady. Ah. Varric's eyes warmed, as if someone had opened a stove door. Here's the game, then. He reached behind, unhurried as a man setting a table, and lifted a coil of tarred rope. He tossed one end to his shooters. String him on the gallows he kept so fine, Sheriff. Hang your deputy for treason in front of your flock. We walk. The fire takes what it takes. Or you try to save him, and I burn the square alive while your hands are busy. Pick. The square seemed to shrink until there was only the bright circle of balcony and gallows and the weight of a town's eyes. Behind Kane, the harmonium in the boarding house bled 3 stubborn notes and quit. Abel's breath hitched. Sheriff. Kane didn't answer the boy. He watched Varric the way a cat watches a rattler. The trick is to see the first twitch before the strike. He spoke without turning his head. Abel, if I give you a word, you move like it was God spoke. Yes, sir, the boy said, voice breaking. Varric threw the rope's free end down. It slapped against the gallows beam, hungry and sure. His voice softened again, mock-kind. Say your creed, Sheriff. Is it law? Or is it justice? Kane slid his silver badge off its pin. The metal was warm. He weighed it once in his palm, then set it, delicate as a prayer, on the gallows step, where the firelight made it glow like a fallen star. Both, he said. He moved, 3 quick steps into the open, body taking the line of the balcony, Colt lifting, when a fresh roar rose from the far end of Maine. The livery roof blew like a blown-out lung, a gout of flame punching into the night. Kerosene had found another wick. The shockwave slapped Kane sideways. Splinters tore the air. People screamed. Horses screamed louder. Above, Varric didn't even flinch. He only lowered one eyelid in the closest thing he'd ever give a man like Kane to a wink. "Choose," he said pleasantly, as the rope swung down and the town filled with the sound of doors unlatching in terror. Smoke clung to the town like old sin. It crawled under doors and into lungs. It ghosted along the blackened rafters of the livery. It smeared the evening sky the color of dried blood. Kane stood in the doorway of the jailhouse with his duster scorched at the hem and cinders glittering in his beard. His silver badge spun slow between thumb and forefinger, catching the last ragged light. The square was a ruin of toppled barrels and broken glass. Bodies lay under canvas by the well. Somewhere, a horse coughed like a dying man. Inside, the living packed tight. 16 souls and the sound of fear making the air hot. Mothers pressing children into corners. Old men gripping rifles with spots on their hands. The Apache girl Naya sitting with sewn-up stitches beneath her collarbone, watching Kane with eyes that gave nothing away. On the floor, shackled to the leg bolt, sat Territorial Marshal Luther Varric, hair neat despite the ash on his coat, lips clean as a preacher's lie. "Sheriff," he said, the words sliding from his mouth like oil, "you've made a spectacular mess." Kane didn't look at him. He watched the street, listened to the wind tug the loose sign of the mercantile so it knocked wood on wood like a slow heartbeat. Beyond the last intact storefront, riders moved, shapes in the smoke, patient as spiders. The survivors called them the Black Dogs. Varric called them contingencies. They had burned half a town to make a point and were waiting to finish the lesson. Deputy Howe limped in with his hat in his hands and dust on his teeth. "They ain't rushing, Sheriff," he said. "They're content to starve us or flame us out." Varric chuckled. "Why hurry? Fire eats the righteous just as fair as the wicked." Kane turned then. He walked to the desk and set his Colt .45 on the scarred wood beside the key ring, the wanted ledgers, the open tin of carbine rounds. His fingers found the badge again, spinning it clockwise, counter. He heard the iron clink on Varric's ankles each time the marshal shifted. "You signed the release order," Kane said, quiet, flat. "You delivered Mercer papers, stamped territorial clemency. You told me the man was a pawn, a bargaining chip, and I took the chain off his wrists and opened that door before sundown. While I was wiring the telegraph to confirm, you rode ahead and lit the fuse under us." "Sheriff." Varric tilted his head, sympathetic as a doctor. "You freed a criminal. That was your hand on the lock, not mine." A murmur moved through the room, thin and ugly. Widow Baines's cheek fluttered. She had lost her boy in the alley behind the saloon. The boy's boot stuck out from under one of those canvas sheets beyond the window. Kane had tucked it back earlier and held her while she shook. Now she rose, tremulous, voice trembling harder than her legs. "Hang him," she said. "Hang the marshal and be done." Naya's eyes flicked to the gallows, standing sentinel on the far edge of the square, black against the smoke, rope like a stripe of winter cloud. She spoke for the first time in an hour. "Iron speaks one word, Sheriff. It says, remember." "The law speaks more than one," Varric answered without being asked. Still chained on the floor, he studied Kane like a surgeon considering where to cut. "It says order. It says peace. It says consequence. Kill me, and your badge, is a trinket you once wore. How spat in the stove's dead ash. Ain't felt like peace lately. A shotgun boomed outside, far end of town, by the freight office. Everyone flinched. Kane didn't. He was past flinching. The sound rolled away. The silence after was louder. He picked up the Colt and fed rounds into the gate with a click-click rhythm that steadied the room more than any prayer. "Marshal," Kane said. "Call them off." Varick crossed his shackled ankles, comfortable as a man after supper. He smiled. "I could. But where would that leave us? You arrest me? Send me to the circuit judge. My friends in clean coats write a different story. By the time the papers reach a city that matters, I am a savior in epaulets. You are an incompetent provincial, and your townsfolk are a sad misfortune, blamed on raiders, or on—" His gaze slid to Naya, lazy as a snake. "Old enemies the public loves to hate." Widow Baines's voice thinned. "Please, Sheriff." Varick's smile widened just a shade. "Or you can string me up and prove my point. A murderer with a badge and a rope. Choose careful, Kane. Either way, I win." Kane holstered the Colt and lifted the iron keyring, felt the cool weight. He stared at them a long moment, at the curve worn smooth by years of turning cells on drunks and thieves, and men who'd made mistakes that could be repaid. The jail smelled of lye, sweat, old coffee. His badge made one last half-circle in his fingers. Then he stopped it and laid it on the desk. It rang against the wood, a small bell in a church that had burned. He poured 2 inches of whiskey into a chipped tin cup and didn't drink. He set it by Varick's boot. "You thirst, Marshal? I don't beg." Varick towed the cup, spilling amber to stain the floor. "And I don't need you." Kane leaned close enough to see his own eyes reflected in Varick's pupils. Steel gray, steady, tired. "Make the call," he whispered. "End this, or I will." Varick's lashes flickered in a true shock, the glint of something primal in Kane's voice that wasn't there an hour ago. "You'd give me to them out there?" Kane's scar along the jaw pulled tight when he spoke. "I'd give you to the rope." A boy's crying rose from the corner. His mother hushed him, and the sound sawed through Kane's ribs like wire. The smell of burned horsehide drifted in. He pushed up and took the shackles key, then took instead the small iron box beneath the desk drawer. He laid it beside the badge and opened it. Inside rested the short oak handle of the gallows lever, wrapped in oiled cloth. The removable spur that tripped the trap. Kane set the lever in the crook of his arm. It was heavier than it looked. Howe swore softly. "Kane." Naya stood. She moved close enough that he could smell pine tar in her braids and the copper ghost of her earlier blood. "You are not only your grief," she said, voice low so only he heard, "but grief rides you like a second saddle." Kane closed his hand around the oak, knuckles whitening. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." He said it without heat, like a man pronouncing weather. The room inhaled. From the street, a voice rode in on the wind. "Kane." Drawn out, taunting, familiar. Rook Mercer, the man Kane had unchained at sundown, face half hidden by a scarf in Kane's memory, eyes bright with a charm that had read as contrition when Varick vouched for him. Now that same voice came from behind a barrel breastwork at the feed store, big as a stage. "Bring out the marshal and we ride. Keep him and we salt the ground with what's left." Howe thumbed the hammer on his Spencer. "Call his bluff, Sheriff." Another voice, thinner, meaner, piped in. "Kids in the church. What ain't burned? Say goodbye if the marshal don't step out." Widow Baines sucked air like she'd been stabbed. Kane's mouth tasted of iron. The church was a skeleton of char and light. They'd found 10 bodies inside already. He'd boarded the sacristy window himself, praying the wind stayed kind around the fuse lines that had laced the nave like vines. Varric watched the math happen behind Kane's eyes. He tipped his head toward the window, casual. "A single life or 20, Sheriff. Hard to argue the arithmetic." Kane moved. He hauled Varric up with a hand in the marshal's lapel and dragged him to his feet. Iron rasped the floor, chains singing. The room flowed around them, making a path. Children pressed into their mothers. The old men rose like bent saplings in wind. Kane marched Varric to the door and stopped with one boot on the threshold. The sky beyond was a bruise. Cinder flakes turned in the cooling air, drifting like gray snow. "Kane," Howe said, voice raw, "if you do this, there ain't any going back." "I know." Kane spoke to the square. "Howe, you hold the north alley. Naya, roof of the post. If it turns bad, you run the children out the back and keep running." Naya didn't argue. She slipped past like smoke. Varric laughed softly. "Look at you, the Roman in a black hat." Kane shoved him into the street, boots on dust, iron on iron. They crossed the square beneath the hanging rope, creaking on some private breeze. Lanterns flared in doorways where glass still held. On the gallows scaffold, the wood planks had drunk years of blood and rain. They smelled like pennies and old storms. Kane forced Varric up the steps. He could feel eyes on his back from every shadow. He could see Mercer's hat just over the rain barrels, the little twitch it made when Mercer grinned. "Mercy first, Kane," Mercer called. "Hand me Luther, and I'll hand you the church brat. Boy's got lungs. Been listening to him sing psalms, poor thing." Varric spoke. From the noose they had not yet thrown. His voice dropped to a whisper, meant for Kane alone. "Shoot him, and my men burn the child. Hang me, and my men burn the child slower. Trade me, and I torch this town again next month, with you watching from a bench in a courtroom we own. Whatever you do, Sheriff, you break." Kane met his eyes and saw there the thing he'd felt in his bones all day. The game was rigged, and any move cost blood. The oak lever warmed to his grip. The rope swung like a patient metronome. He slipped the noose over Varric's head. He tightened it, so the knot sat cruel and correct on the ear, same as he'd been taught in another winter under another judge. The crowd, whatever passed for a crowd now, was silent enough to hear a moth's wings brush a window. Mercer shifted, restless, hungry. The church bell's cracked tongue clinked somewhere far off, nudged by the evening's breath. Kane lifted the lever chest high. He didn't raise his badge. He didn't pray. He didn't look for permission on any face in the square. The law had run out of words. He pulled, and a rifle cracked from the freight office roof, sharper and nearer than Mercer's men. The lantern by the gallows post shattered into stars, fire licking up the oily spill, and the rope snapped up above the noose with a noise like wet cloth, torn fast. Varric dropped to his knees, not through a trap, but onto wood, choking, eyes wild. The church door flew open, silhouette of a small figure, smoke boiling behind him, and a tall man in a black duster stepped into the square with a Henry leveled at Kane's chest. The man's badge caught the firelight. It wasn't Kane's. "Sheriff," the stranger drawled, voice cold enough to put out sparks. "By authority of the governor, I'm placing you under arrest." The man in the black duster stood in the blown-open church door with a Henry leveled at Kane's heart, smoke roiling behind him like a living thing. A soot-streaked boy clung to his coat. The hostage child, coughing, eyes big as coins. "Sheriff," the stranger called, the badge on his lapel bright as an accusation. "By authority of the governor of the territory, I'm placing you under arrest for unlawful hanging and breach of peace. Hand over your sidearm." Behind Kane, the rope he'd just tightened sagged in two smoking ends where the lantern's explosion had snapped it. Marshal Royce Bell, still ironed at wrists and ankles, knelt drunk on air and fury, the noose collaring his throat without a drop to finish the lesson. On the courthouse balcony across the square, Elias Varick tipped a matchbook and smiled down as if he'd rehearsed the ruin. Kane's thumb found the familiar weight of pearl and steel. The square smelled of creosote and pennies. Survivors crowded the jailhouse threshold, Widow Baines clutching her shawl like a flag. Naya on the post office roofline, rifle low. Abel Finch, pale and rigid near the gallows leg, soot in his hair where a bullet had shaved him. The riders in the street, Varick's bought men and the last of crows, shifted in their saddles, hands easy near triggers, waiting to see which way the world would tilt. "Name?" Kane said to the stranger, voice steady. "Cyrus Pike," the man replied, "Special Deputy to the Governor." The Henry never wavered. "Your gun, Sheriff." "Now." Kane weighed him the way he weighed weather. Pike's eyes weren't cruel. They were tired and exact, the kind that had written more reports than letters home. Law in a fine coat. The boy at his hip coughed hard, and Pike's hand twitched as if to comfort, then fixed itself back to duty. A dry cluck of tongue from above. Varick leaned on the balcony rail, looking amused and holy. "Listen to the voice of righteousness, Kane." He called pleasantly, "Lay down your iron. I'll lay down a blessing." "Bless this," growled Rook Mercer from behind the freight barrels, and fired twice into the square for punctuation. Splinters sang. Kane removed his Colt and held it low, muzzle down. He looked at Pike, not Varick. "You got the child out," he said. "Much obliged. Not for you," Pike said, meaning it. Then quieter. "Not only." Another shot cracked from the courthouse window. Bell's men trying to rally the story back to their favor. The bullet chipped stone near Kane's boot and made his choice plain. Kane slid his silver badge free, thumbed its face once so the light ran like water over the hammered star, then tossed it across the dust. Pike caught it to his chest, by habit before it fell. Kane's voice went iron. "Hold that for me a spell." Pike's jaw moved on a word he didn't say. Kane turned and shoved Marshal Bell forward into Howe's hands. "Keep him breathing," Kane ordered. "He stands in daylight before judgment, or not at all." Bell bared his teeth. "You're finished, Kane." "Maybe." Kane's steel-gray eyes climbed the courthouse front to the man who'd written this night in other men's blood. "But so are you." Varick snuffed the match with 2 fingers and smiled. "Come prove it." Kane ran. He cut the square at a diagonal, boot-slamming plank, then dirt, then courthouse steps. 2 of Varick's shooters pivoted. Naya's rifle cracked twice, neat as sewing, and both men dropped like shirts cut from a line. Pike swore once, at Kane, at Varick, at the governor's seal, then shoved the child into a church pew and moved, flanking with the clean economy of a professional who'd learned too late who paid for order. Abel surged up beside Kane, wild-eyed, clutching the rifle Kane had given him that morning. "Stay on the stairs," Kane said. "Count to 10. If I don't come out, you light the fuse under nothing." A raw corner of humor, which is to say, "Don't you dare." "Yes, sir," Abel breathed, and took his post, small, and fierce. Inside the courthouse burned like a throat. Law books smoldered to black lace on open desks. The floor creaked under heat like an old knee. The air tasted of old varnish and fresh lies. Varick's tracks, polished soles, a man unafraid of splinters, angled toward the rotunda and up the curving stairs where the roof had cracked years ago, and nobody had mended it because justice here had limped too long. Halfway up, a body slumped. Boyd Mallory, the deputy who'd blinked the code from the steeple, one hand pressed to a stomach wound with a prayer book kind of touch. He looked at Kane with a boy's shame in a man's face. He said it was federal, Boyd rasped. Said it was just a show. I swear I didn't. He coughed, red. Fuse, roof. Past Boyd, a bundle of canvas swelled like a sleeping dog. Kane tore it open. Sticks of powder, a spiderweb of fuses braided for a single, bright end. He yanked, ripped, snapped, fingers working blind in smoke. Flames licked his knuckles and bit. He didn't stop until the braids came apart like old arguments. Boyd caught his wrist. I got the rest, the deputy croaked. Buy me a little light. Buy yourself a little mercy, Kane said, and squeezed once before he moved on. At the landing, Varick waited in the blue-orange glow of a dying day filtered through smoke. Hat off now, hair damp, but the smile intact. Beyond him, the roof had split like a grinning skull, ash sifting through the gap in slow snow. He held a derringer low in his right hand and something brighter in his left, a coil of fuse already whispering fire. Stop, Kane said. Why should I? Varick asked, honest curiosity in it. He gestured with the burning coil toward the courtroom below, where benches were stacked against doors to keep riders out. You kill me, and I drop this and we all end with a moral. Crowds burn quick. You let me walk and I'll build you a monument in any city you like. Drop it, Pike said from the shadow of the opposite arch, his Henry set on Varick's ribcage, as neat as a stethoscope. His coat smoked where an ember had tasted it. Or I'll put daylight through your lungs. Varick turned his face toward the new badge. Deputy Pike, he said gently, like a schoolteacher marking a fine pen stroke. You're late to your own conscience. You paid to slay a town, Pike said. Conscience showed up on time. Kane took another step. The derringer rose a finger's width. The fuse hissed like a snake that had found a reason to live. Kane's voice dropped, a gravel prayer. Law ain't always justice, he said, the old words flint struck in a new dark. But justice rides with me. Varick sighed. At last, he murmured, as if the script had reached its favorite line. The world narrowed to the quick muscles of two men's hands. Kane moved first, left foot into bad flooring that he knew would flex, torso cut right, Colt up not to shoot the hand with the derringer, but the hand with the fuse. The first shot tore the ember into a spray of smoking fireflies. Varick flinched, not from pain but from surprise that his story had hiccuped. Pike's shot came half a heartbeat later, clean through Varick's shoulder. The outlaw stumbled, pivoted, smiled too wide. Much obliged, Varick hissed, and threw himself backward into the gap under the cracked roof, catching the edge with bleeding fingers. He dangled over the courtroom void, boots scrabbling at plaster. The coil of dead fuse spilled like gray rope beside him. Below, townsfolk cried out. A woman crossed herself. Abel shouted Pike's name. Somewhere far in the square, a horse screamed like a fiddle string. Kane stepped to the edge and looked down. Varick smiled up, teeth bright through smoke. "Well?" he asked, conversational as a card game. "Savior or executioner?" The choice Kane had worn like a hair shirt all day slid round his throat. He could holster the Colt, grab a wrist, haul a devil to trial, and let clean coats smudge the verdict. Or he could make the drop and end the ledger with a single stroke. He holstered. Varick's eyes widened, truly for the first time, as Kane crouched and reached down into the heated air and got a hand under that blood-slick wrist. "Not tonight," Kane said through teeth and smoke. "I won't let you right me." Varick's fingers flexed. He let Kane feel the weight, the choice, the lie of it, and then he changed the math. His free hand slapped the butt of Kane's holstered Colt. The tie-down snapped, iron slid. Varick's palm came up with the pearl-handled gun like a magic trick a child should never learn. He leveled it at Kane's heart at breath's distance. "Then I will," he whispered, tender as a sin. A shot cracked. Varick jerked, not from Kane's gun, but from a third. Abel's, fired clean from the landing below, the boy's eyes wide with something he'd never get back. Blood burst from Varick's temple in a fine mist that looked like red ash in the lamplight. The outlaw's smile froze to a rictus of surprise, then unhooked into nothing. He fell, taking with him a sheet of old plaster and years of smoke. He hit the courtroom floor with a dull, wet finality. The town inhaled as one. Kane stood very still, hands still extended to a ghost of weight. Below, Pike shouted orders. Naya's voice floated in, "Clear, clear," and boots thudded. Boyd Mallory dragged himself onto the landing, one hand pressed to his wound, the other holding a splayed bouquet of cut fuses. "Am I?" Boyd panted, white to the lips. "A deputy again?" Kane looked at him a long time and nodded once. "You remembered." Boyd smiled with his mouth only and slumped where he stood, the fuses spilling across his lap like gray flowers as he sagged into Abel's arms. Marshal Bell, ironed and ashen, was hauled to the rail. He saw Varick's ruin below and found bluster anyway. "Murder," he said hoarsely. "You'll hang for this, Kane." Kane picked up his fallen badge where Pike had caught it. He looked at the star, then at the town through the curtain of smoke. The faces made old by a single night. The char, the ash, the way the gallows rope swung with no wind. He pinned the badge back to his chest with fingers that didn't quite feel like his. "Maybe I will," he said, voice low, "but you'll stand first." Pike holstered his Henry, took a ragged breath, and nodded without smiling. "By the book," he said, surprising himself with the relief in it. "For once." Kane walked down the stairs into the hard light of the ruined courtroom and stood beside what was left of Elias Varick. He felt no victory, only an end he could carry. Outside, the wind shifted. Ash fell in slow, soft sheets that looked like a blessing if you didn't know the cost. The courthouse groaned, as if remembering the weight it had been built to hold. A beam cracked somewhere up in the rafters with a sound like a judge's gavel. People flinched. Kane lifted a hand. "Out," he said, and they went. On the threshold, he paused and looked back at the pews strewn with burned paper. The dead rope swaying, the stain spreading under the man who had called himself the hand that knocks and the hand that opens. "Law ain't always justice," Kane said to no one at all, "but tonight we'll make the walk together." He stepped into the smoke-washed street, with his badge crooked and his shadow long, and the town, broken, breathing, shifted around him to see what he was now. By dawn, the square wore a new geography. The livery was a rib cage. The courthouse had lost its crown. Widow Baines sat with other women on the boarding-house steps, mending with hands that shook, because mending is what the living do. Abel's shot still rang in the marrow of the town, though only he could hear the echo. Boyd Mallory slept with fuses in his lap and a clean cloth over his wound, his breath counting second chances. Pike sat apart, writing what he could make the governor understand, and leaving out what a man should carry himself. As for me, the badge was heavy again. Not because it gleamed, but because it had been set down and picked up. The difference stains. I freed a criminal, and the town bled. I nearly dropped a man through a trap, and the law would have called it neat. Instead, a boy pulled a trigger that saved my life and ended another's, and that arithmetic will never balance, not in any book I've seen. I used to think law was a straight road, and justice the wagon that rode it. Now I know both are mules that bite when they're handled wrong. Some nights, I'll be a savior. Some nights, an executioner. The badge won't change either thing. Only the walking will. Wind moved the ash along Maine like a tired river. I set my hat, felt the scar along my jaw pull, and listened to the town breathe. Law ain't always justice, I told the morning, but justice rides with me. If it damns me, it will be for what I chose in the light.